well as the grunt and the grind, but just run us through a typical week for South, what they do, you know. How many sessions do you have a week in weights?
Yeah, in the off season we'll generally have four sessions, and then in season, depending on the amount of time we've got between games, will be either 1 or 2 sessions. But most weeks we'll have 2 sessions, and how we change those sessions up is one seems to be a bit more of a circuit type session, sort of earlier after the game. You know, a couple of days after the game.
I'm going to say, how soon after the game would you start getting into it? A couple of days?
Yeah, generally it'll be a couple of days after a game, and then later in the week we'll have more of a strength power focus when they've got a bit more time to recover before the game.
Just on that point of recovery of that, it seems to be fairly important that you know you get the mix right. You had a heavy session.
Yeah.
What about? Go us through that recovery period. What have you got to do with the guys to have them right for the next time you have a session?
We generally look at trying to implement different recovery modalities for different sessions. So, for instance, there may be a conditioning session where we'll have some sort of fluid or fuel replacement, and same for a strength session. So if the guys do a strength session, we'll always make sure they've got get their supplements into them as a priority, and then after that we might have a different recovery mechanism. So, for example, an ice bath, especially on a double day when we're training twice in the one day.
So not double day on weights,
No.
No.
We'll just do weights once a day. But yeah, get the guys into the ice bars, freshen them up so they're right to go again for the afternoon session.
With weights, you just said 2 things then, and that's a conditioning session and say as against a heavy bulk session. Just break that down. What's a conditioning session?
A conditioning session will be more a field conditioning session.
Okay.
Yeah, so we sort of differentiate the two. Whilst they will do, sometimes they will have a circuit type session in the weight room, and there will be a small conditioning component to it. We're not looking for our strict conditioning games from those areas. We more do them on field.
And with your heavy session, like getting into it, how long would that last, and what do they go through with it? We'll say, you know, a good heavy session.
Generally, the breakdown of our sessions is we'll have some functional type movements, or you might call them injury prevention type movements, and then we'll get into the strict lifting part of it. The whole session won't go any longer than an hour from start to finish, and of that, probably 40 minutes is the real heavy part of it, with numerous sets and reps and rest periods based on where we are in the season and sort of what phase we're working on.
Yeah. I was going to ask you that actually too. I'll probably jump ahead and ask you that question, but obviously off season, give it all you got. Pre-season, I'm sorry, you give it all you got. You get into that middle section and see there's a bit of a grind going on with the season as far as hard games. Then this is the finish. Just run it through. You've got your heavy sessions in pre-season, of course.
Yep. Yeah. Well, it really depends on how the guys come back, and if they come back in good shape, we can start at a higher level. Because it's our first year, both myself and the assistant strength conditioning coach, we're getting to know the guys and their strengths and weaknesses. So the off season for us this year was a little bit of a finding out period of what we need to do with the guys. A lot of guys have injuries, operations at those times, so it's rehabbing those guys to get them back to a level where they can go at full intensity. And then in season, we try to cycle it around the game, so we'll have either a 3 or a 4 week cycle, and within that cycle we'll get close to a maximal strength type session, so that we can monitor the guys from the off season to see if they're losing any strength or whether we're maintaining it or even gaining it.
In that middle period, I mean, there has to be some variety, because it does get, for the want of a better word, it does get boring after all you go, and that's it, here we go again, so How do you sort of lighten it up and make it sort of interesting for the guys doing that?
Yeah, we generally will use different toys or pieces of apparatus.
Yeah.
So for instance, where a bench press might change is we might do something as simple as just change the grip position, or we might add in some bands and chains as an external resistance, which is different for the guys, and they're working at a little bit harder through the movement, so the weight might be lighter, but then they've got a resistance of extra chains on there that they've got to lift all the way through the movement as well.
And if you're lucky enough, and there's 8 teams going to be lucky enough to get to that final series, where does it change for you then as far as your weight conditioning would go? As far as you're trying to freshen them up for that period of time, you've had a long season, what's the process in there?
Generally, we probably wouldn't change a real lot. Week to week, we want to think that every game is important, so we want to make sure that they're fresh for the game. So whilst we're trying to keep them fresh for the game, so there is some work that has to be done. So if we've got a longer week, you know, we play on a Friday and then don't play again till the following Monday, we might actually have that as a week where they're doing a bit more heavier work, as opposed to a shorter week where we might only do one session. So that in a way is sort of freshening them up anyway. If anything that we make adjustments to, it might be just the volume of the session. So we'll still do the session, but where it might not last 60 minutes for the whole session, it might be cut back to 40, 45 minutes. Yeah, so it's sort of dropping out a set in each exercise, just to decrease that volume.
You've got some new recruits into the club, some kids from the bush, as you obviously would have.
Yeah.
Hasn't got a lot of weight, so what is the first thing you try? It's got to be the technique you've got to get right first, isn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely. We do something that we call a physical competency test. So we're actually looking at what parts of the body are strong or weak or tight. So we'll do up to sort of 40 small tests on the guys, and then we give them a rating based on all of those tests, and then look at the areas that they're weak and try to strengthen those up before we even start to get into the actual lifting side of it. So we're really concentrating on the function of the body as opposed to trying to get them strong in the first 4 weeks that they get there. So if we can get their functional movements right, eradicate those weaknesses that they have, then we can start working on building them up or stripping them down or making them stronger or more powerful.
Because just because a big guy walks in the gym doesn't mean to say he's going to be that strong. He could be doing the whole thing, couldn't he?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And in the other terms, there might be a big guy that comes in who is strong in one particular movement, but in the game, we've got so many different movements, and we're working a lot of different planes, so they need to have that functional strength. They get into these grappling positions, wrestling positions on the field. The ability just to move an external resistance in one plane doesn't necessarily translate out onto the field. So that's why we try to get that function involved, so that we get some transference onto the field.
Yeah. I might pick up there's the wrestle or the grapple as you're calling it, but that's all right into your strength and training conditioning, isn't it, really?
Yeah, definitely, and we sort of factor that in because we'll have a component to our training where the guys are actually spend some time on the field specifically on wrestling, and because we know that's part of our whole program, we probably don't do as much specific work in the gym because we know what they're getting that out on the field.
Just breaking your team down, backs and forwards, positions, wingers against front rowers. Just give me some idea of the different positions and how you train a little guy on the wing as against a good sizable front rower. They've got to be doing different things, haven't they?
I think that's a bit of a misconception. Like we don't have a major difference in the programs that they're doing. It's more based around what I was saying earlier, is their physical competence. If they're incapable of getting into a deep position because their glutes are too tight or they've got no range in their ankle, there's no point trying to make them powerful if they can't get into the position in the first place. And that's something that we're trying to build in, especially with the younger players, so that when they come through, they've got that function. We're getting players who've been around for a while, and because of those inadequacies or inefficiencies, we've had to take them back. And that's one of the problems that we sometimes get with young kids, is they've been given programs that senior players who've had 5-6 years of lifting experience, and they think that that's